Well, I was just trying to make a preliminary remark and to say what a joy it is to be here and a pleasure to be here, and to thank all the powers that be for making this event possible for all of us. I won't name any names at this point. You know who you are. We know who you are. Thank you very, very much for this beautiful setting for this summer school. And so I was just trying to tell you that this last 2 years since I've seen you, it's been 2 years now since we've had a summer school, has been a very, very dynamic time for me, and I'm sure for all of you, because we live in a new age. We live in a new consciousness. We're no longer looking forward to the 7,000-year period as we have over the last decades, the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years together. Some of us have known each other for a very long time, have been together working in the science of being for a long time. And during those years, we would always speak about the coming of the 7,000-year period, that we were just on the threshold. So many times I have said we're on the threshold of that new consciousness, of that new age. And we could feel it breaking in, coming in during those years, those beautiful years of the 6,000-year period consciousness, when we were training ourselves and being trained and being groomed, being manicured in the 6,000-year period consciousness, the consciousness of truth, the analysis of truth, the full form of truth. And we always said that we were on the verge. We felt more and more that we were on the verge of something new. Something new was coming. And as we lived through that time together, truly and honestly, and it really was, if we look at the whole pattern of time, and time is patterned by the timeless, we can see that we were in the period of truth as love. All together, isn't that beautiful that we lived together through that period of truth as love, where we came to the final and full and complete forming of the new consciousness of truth. And little by little we felt how love was coming in, love was breaking in. Love began to show us something about the wholeness of truth, about the fact of holism, that love would have to do with showing us that truth would lead us to the integration of love, to the plan of love, to the design of love, to the fulfilling and perfection of love, and into a completely new form of consciousness. So this is a kind of a paradox, that we were building up and building up the form of truth, building up the consciousness of truth, and when that consciousness was filled to the fullest, the fact is that we couldn't add any more to it. That when something is full, when it is completed, you can't go on adding to it. It fulfills its role, its mission, its purpose. In what? In a whole development. So that everything that we have done, everything that has gone on over what we call 6,000-year periods, up to the 7,000-year period, everything that has gone on and everything that we have done and our trueness to the consciousness of truth, the consciousness of the 6,000-year period, belongs to a whole development, doesn't it? It cannot be taken out of that development. It cannot be taken out of the divine order. But those 7,000-year periods, and I presume perhaps something at this point, or I assume, I make an assumption that you know something about the 7,000-year periods. If you don't worry, I'll tell you about it. But what we are talking about is a framework, an ordered framework of development that governs the evolution of consciousness. That there is an ordered framework of development, that there is a law, that order is a law, it's a law in being, that our development of consciousness, our evolution of consciousness, our spiritual growth is governed, is divinely governed. And that we cannot help but to take part, to partake in that evolution. Whether we're conscious of it or not, whether we want to or not, whether we care or not, we cannot get outside of that framework. It's a divine framework that embraces everything, absolutely everything. And you know, or you have heard as Christian scientists, that all is consciousness. Everything is consciousness. We look at this table and we think it's hardcore matter, that it's something that isn't consciousness, but it is a form of consciousness. Everything in our universe, our whole universe, is a consciousness question. And so these 7,000-year periods have led us, this framework, this order, this law has been leading us somewhere. It has led us through the close of the climax of the 6,000-year period. And now we have crossed over the threshold into the 7,000-year period of love. The age of divine science, we could say. Some of us wonder what's going on, what's happening, because we find that the old methods don't work anymore, that we can't solve our old problems the way we used to, that we feel differently about our practice. Or I could perhaps just take myself as an example, that one feels that something has come in that says you can't practice in the way that you used to practice. Why? Because we have completed the 6,000-year period. Something new is coming in, and we cannot solve the old problems with new methods, and we cannot solve new problems with old methods. So there are so many issues that are coming up, and they're coming up, you know, not only with Christian scientists. Is that, I love that. I love that, because Christian Science is the world. We live in a community, a world community, a universal community, where the spiritual idea is at work, where that evolution of consciousness is at work. It's going on everywhere, in every discipline, in the consciousness of every scientist. Everyone in any discipline who approaches their subject scientifically with the highest sense of their understanding of what science is. It may still be small s science. Maybe they don't know anything about capital S science, but it's the first faint appearing of capital S science. As I've said so many times, you're probably tired of hearing that, but I love that fact that going on everywhere in all the sciences, in all the endeavors of life, is this one law. This one law of creativity. This one law that governs the evolution of consciousness. And so the whole of world consciousness is changing. Now we look at our world, each one of us looks at our world, we probably check it at least once a day, if not more. We check the newspaper, we check the television, we listen to the radio, we listen perhaps to talk radio. Oh boy. To check our world and see how is it doing. And what kind of an answer do we get? Huh? Well, we go to the internet, and we have perhaps our favorite websites where we like to see what's going on from this perspective or that perspective, or a certain political standpoint, or governmental agenda or whatever. And we check to see the status of our world every day. How do we feel about our world? Do we feel positive about it? Do we feel hopeful about it? Do we feel negative about it? Do we feel that there are two things going on? At least two things, but two great factions, of what we would call good and evil. Good and evil. And that these two are warring it out, and that one is going to win over the other, and one will be victorious, and it looks very, very often as though the evil doers, quote unquote, would win that war, would win that battle. If we have this consciousness, this mentality, we know that we are still in the 6,000-year period, that we have not been overtaken by the consciousness of love. We have not been touched by the consciousness of love sufficiently to take us out of a sense of there being two things going on. So, what can we do to nurture this new consciousness? What can we do to nurture that glorious consciousness that here and there breaks in on us? And I'm sure that every one of you has experienced that consciousness where you feel in your heart, and your heart is your consciousness, where you feel and you know that everything is all right, that all is good, that there's only one thing going on, that there is a divine design, that there is a plan in being, that everything works in that plan, that every detail is a detail of that plan, that there's something more than I see on the surface, that there's a deep structure, that there's a deep reality called love. Love, something in being that has a design, that has a plan of salvation which is being worked out through time, through all experiences, that is being worked out individually, collectively, universally, at every point in the universe. And you know, from time to time, that breaks in on you, does it not? And this is the breaking in of love. This is the first breaking in of the consciousness of love. So over these next 3-4 days together, I would like to take these very issues with you. And I would like to take some time with the issue of practice, of how we practice, of what the new practice of love is. Do we have an example anywhere that would show us, where we would know how love is leading thought along a new sense of practicing according to love? Does love give us any methods to follow? Does it give us rules? These rules are so important because they touch us right where we are. They tell us what to do. They're the do's and the don'ts, you see. And love has a lot of do's and don'ts. Do this, and don't do this. Do this, don't do that. And I'd like to explore that just a little bit with you over these next days and show you how to go ahead and further explore it when you leave here. But I want to do a lot of different things. This evening I just want to talk generally about this concept of 7,000-year periods, the concept of consciousness developing, that consciousness does not stay in the same place, is not allowed to become static, is not unmoving, and what the modus operandi is or are that show us this scientifically, that show us this in Christian Science, and that therefore enable us to understand it, and not just to say it, not just to make a statement, but where we can look into the laws of being and see why these things are going on, why our universe is progressing, why we are progressing. Whether we think we are or not, we are. We are. Progress is the law of God. And that law is intimately tied to the law of the word order. So I'm just starting with you just to kind of get our feet wet and to let you know what we want to do over the next days. I want to talk to you about some of the things that are going on in our universe, of how the consciousness is changing in the sciences, what is coming in and what is going out, what doesn't work anymore and what begins to work that didn't work before, that was never thought of before. Love brings in something we haven't thought of before. We just didn't think of it because we weren't prepared, we weren't ready. We needed the consciousness of truth to prepare us for love. It's the consciousness of truth that makes us ready to accept love, to take love in, to give love a chance, to give it an opportunity, to try it out, to allow. And you hear love, huh? That truth readies us, it forms us, it prepares us to open up to love, to open up to something new, to open up to our universe, you see, not to shut it out, not to close it out. In the 6,000-year period, we had to do a lot of closing out. Closing. I just love that sixth subject in the first chapter of prayer, where she talks about that right sense of closing, of going into the closet. She ties it all to prayer and to Jesus teaching the true sense of prayer, the right sense of prayer, to go open the door, go into the closet, shut the door, don't let anything in there with you, pray to your Father which is in heaven, and your Father which seeth in secret will reward thee openly. It's just a beautiful illustration of what the 6,000-year period has been for us, what that consciousness is, that we must go into the closet, we must shut out everything that is of the world, and it's at that point she talks about the world of error and the world of truth, the world of truth and the world of error. And she says that the door to the closet is open to truth, but closed to error. Closed to error. And so that beautiful time that we have had and that we continue to have is a time of becoming closed. I know many of you heard me talk about that before, about what it means to be closed, what it means to be open. That until we are closed by that 6th day, that 6,000-year period, until consciousness is closed and becomes formed and shaped and organized by the divine system of reference, by the categories of being, formed and shaped and molded into the same form as, and therefore isomorphic, that consciousness becomes isomorphic with truth itself, with the form and constituency of truth itself. What is that form? What is that constituency? It's the very system of being, the categories of being, the sevenfold nature of being, the fourfold operation of being, to be drilled and fluent, just that one can flow and be free and active within the 7 synonymous terms, within the 4 operations, within the 4 levels, that you know where you are, that you know the relationships between all of those categories, and that you would never mix them up. You would never hesitate and say, well, let me see, what was that again? I think I can remember. It's more than remembering. It's more than thinking. It's becoming the consciousness of. This is what the 6,000-year period wants to do. This is the office of the 6,000-year period, to make you the consciousness of truth. Then you are closed, you see. And you become closed by closing yourself off, in a way, from everything that isn't truth, and separating and saying, no, that isn't true, that isn't real, isn't that what we did in the 6th? Isn't that what truth does, huh? The office of truth is to say, this is true, this is not true. Or you can go right through the 7. You can take the 7 from the standpoint of truth. See, as mind, truth says, this is an idea, this is an illusion. In spirit, this is a reality, this is an unreality. In soul, this is an identity, this is a counterfeit. You see that? That our whole grooming and training and education in truth is absolutely indispensable. You can never know what love is if you don't know what truth is. Only as we know what truth is do we know what love is. And vice versa, the moment we touch love, we're going to know truth even better. We will know truth. We will appreciate truth. We will value truth. We will adore truth in a completely new way as we touch love. But we cannot touch love until we know truth, till we are groomed and just, what can I say, that favorite statement of John Dorley's about being that the platoons of Christian Science must be thoroughly drilled in the planar manual of their spiritual armament. He used to love to pound on the table and say that and try to show his students how vital it is to be trained in the truth of the science of being, in the system of the science of being, in the categories of the science of being. This is what equips you for everything. You can't just dawdle around and play around with that. And, well, you know, it isn't really a moral decision anyway. It isn't a decision, well, shall I be more serious? You know, sometimes I come across sounding a bit moralistic, perhaps, that one should get in there and find out what it is. But that isn't my highest sense. My highest sense is there is a Christ idea. God has an idea, in other words. Being has an idea. The divine nature has an idea. The divine operation has an idea. Those levels, all together, that system has an idea that it is bringing out, and it is the Christ idea. It is the saving idea. It is the idea that is going to come to you, that is coming to you, to your experience, that is bringing you everything in your experience that you need. There is not anything in your experience that you don't need. Now, we always say, or at least I have been heard to say, I don't need this. But the Christ gives us the ideal circumstances for our spiritual evolution, for our development. And so no one has to go around rapping on knuckles and, you know, pointing the finger and shaking the finger and saying, you should do this and you should do that and you ought to study more and how many hours a day do you study? And, you know, sometimes someone will call me and they'll say, I studied 4 hours today and every morning I studied so and so long and so forth. And I think that's wonderful. That somebody else may call me and they may say, you know, I just don't feel like studying at all. And I haven't studied for quite some time. And you know, that's just as fine with me. I mean, to my sense. Because I know that there is something at work that is regulating that is taking care of that. And that's the Christ. And that Christ is all to do with the individual consciousness. The Christ office is to come to the individual consciousness and to work with that individual consciousness. The Christ is totally engaged with each and every individual consciousness and knows what to do with it, knows how to lead it, knows exactly the experiences that are ideal for you to have, that will develop you, that will cause you to grow, that will bring your spiritual evolution forward, that will bring the advancement of the spiritual idea within you, which is your own identity, your own individuality. So we really have already talked about in a this is a rather free and not highly structured presentation at this point, but There's something worthwhile about it. You see, it's drawing from the atmosphere of life, the environment of one's whole life experience and what we all go through. And we've already seen two great points from the system of being. We've seen something about the word, haven't we? That there is a law in being, that law is a creative law. It is creating something in us. It is, you see, that means so much. To be creative, to create something is to develop something, to unfold something, to evolve something, to give something a start, to start something within us, and to unfold that start to a completion, to a meaningful, fulfilled, purposeful conclusion. And the very fact that there is a law in being that does that, and that doesn't just do it when we call on it, you know, and pray about it, and doesn't just do it when we ask for it. It's doing it all the time, at every moment. That law is working. And then we saw something about the Christ, that the Christ is dealing with the individual, is involved with the individual consciousness. So that law, that creative law, that law of evolution, is a law that is involved with each individual, whether we know it or not, are conscious of it or not, want it or not, care or not, you see. Because you'll find those individuals who say, well, so what? I don't care. And thinking that they can just get on with business as usual as they perceive it. But this is never the case. We're never outside of that law, the workings of the law of the word and the implementation, the execution of that law in our individual lives through the Christ. So when we talk about 1,000-year periods, we should begin to feel more and more as we consider these 1,000-year periods that they are not something out there, and they're not something far away or in the past, something that was in the past and now it's perhaps coming somewhat into the present, and parts of it concern us. That 6,000-year period, 7,000-year period, we are concerned with, because as we begin to realize that we live in that age, that time has been stamped with that character, that nature, that we have a 1,000-year period, 1,000 years, stamped with the identity of truth, coined by truth, and that now we come into another millennium, the millennium of love, the age of love, that is stamped and coined by love, that we are somewhat interested to know about that. But what we need to see is that these 1,000-year periods per se are not so much time concepts. They're kind of like spiritual archetypes. Would you know what I meant if I said that? They're like, I don't know whether you want to say archetypes or archetypes, that they don't have to do with time, but with states and stages of consciousness that develops. So over 7,000 years, we have really the development or a significant and meaningful and distinct development of mankind's consciousness as a whole. But you can see that as we come into the 6,000 year period, for instance, that we have many individuals who didn't live 4, 5, 6,000 years ago, but that live now. And yet we go through those stages. We somehow go through those same stages that have been delineated through time periods, you see. I'm reminded again of that wonderful, let's say, fundamental thing in biology. Maybe someone knows, one of you might know about it. Phylogeny and ontogeny. Nobody knows. That means I'm on safe ground. I can say anything now. It's either ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, or phylogeny, I think it's phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny. And this is a terrific thing that they see in nature, that if you take a species in nature, say a crab, certain type of crab, you would see that looking at the whole species, that the whole species has a development, has an evolution. That species has gone through fundamental changes, right? Where a mutation came in, a change came in, changed perhaps the shape of the shell or the size of a claw or whatever. And so they would be able to see that from the first appearing of that species to the present day appearing of the individual in that species, has been an evolution. This, I believe, is ontogeny. And then they would see, well, actually, if you look now in the present day at the individual member of the species, each individual member in its lifetime goes through all those stages that the whole species went through. Isn't that a tremendous thing? It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. We shouldn't feel it's just matter, it's just biology. No. This is every member of the species goes through the stages that the whole species went through. That's what we see with the 1,000-year periods. That we had the first 1,000-year period of Adam and Eve and the Adam dream and working out the Adam dream and so forth. And we had the second 1,000-year period, right, of Noah and the flood and the Tower of Babel. And as we look more deeply into those symbols, we find the metaphysical ideas behind them. We find the great points, the great spiritual message, the meaning that was going on in that particular 1,000-year period, so that looking more deeply into the first 1,000-year period, we see that actually it was all about mind, all about all having to do with mind and the light of mind and the creativity of mind and the bringing forthness of mind and mind having an idea and being able to set that idea forth and expound it and establish it. And in spirit, it would have to do not with the people, not with Noah, not with Noah's sons and all the giants. And, you know, the world tries to figure it all out, figure out what it means. What are those giants? Where are they now? Where do they live? What island are they on? All the wrong questions. Instead of going behind the symbol, going to the metaphysical idea, and then seeing what is the noumenon of the metaphysical idea, you see. And so the noumenon is the one spirit behind that second 1,000-year period. So with each of those 1,000-year periods, you have your symbols, and you have the metaphysical ideas behind those symbols. And behind the metaphysical ideas, you have the noumenon itself, reality itself. So the reality of the whole development is the order of mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, love, right? Behind all those symbols and behind the metaphysical ideas that those symbols represent lies the noumenon, which is the reality, which is the real message. That's the real message. The deep structure is the real message. Because that real message is bringing out the law of creativity. It's bringing out the law of evolution. And so now we see, well, actually the important thing is not what happened 6,000 years ago, 5,000, 4,000 years ago. The important thing is the noumenon, right? Not the phenomenon, but the noumenon. And that each individual goes through that same law of creativity, that each individual goes through that same law of evolution. And so in the individual life, all of those previous stages of 6,000, 7,000 year periods are gathered up into the individual life experience of each one of us. Is that not beautiful? I think it's beautiful. So, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, or phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny. You also see that, an example of that in the different editions of the textbook. Taking, for instance, especially the 5th chapter. You remember that chapter on animal magnetism, unmasked, and the work that was done, especially by Max Kapler, on those various editions, and it was discerned that there were 7 main editions in all of the many, many editions that have come forth. There are 7 main editions. And when you go back to the first edition, you find that the accentuation is on mind. The subject is animal magnetism, but the accentuation is from the standpoint of mind. When you come to the second, and many of you know this, that the accentuation is on spirit. And then the third on soul, the fourth on principle, life, truth, and love. But when you come to the final edition, you find that the chapter in its present stage, in its final stage, recapitulates all of the preceding stages, gathers them into one presentation. You hear that? It's a beautiful, beautiful law. It shows us, it makes me feel something is involved with me. Something cares about me as an individual. This is love. This is typically love. To be engaged with me, to be involved with me in such a way as to have a plan, you see, to have a plan, to have a design for my life my development, my growth, my advancement, what happens to me, what I do. It encompasses, it embraces everything in my life. It's involved with everything in my life. What I choose to do, what I choose to be, what activities I involve myself in, what activities I don't involve myself in. That we think very often that we're alone, that we're on our way, on that way of life. Have you ever felt alone? Have you ever felt that you are on your own and making your way through? And when you realize that this law is at work, you have a tremendous sense that love is overshadowing you and that you've never been alone. I don't know if you've ever had those times breaking in where you see that love has been there at every moment, that love's been there all the time. When you were a child, when you were led into this experience and out of it, and led into this relationship and out of it, or more deeply into it, whatever, that love is there with you, and that Christ idea is there with you, totally involved, totally involved. That's love. So that when you think you're making decisions, you really aren't making those decisions. We are led. We're led, and we make certain choices, and love always says, I can work with that. Isn't that great, huh? Isn't that beautiful? That love says, I can work with that. I can weave that in to the design. I can make that work in the pattern. That, love has all to do with, with networking, with weaving, with connections, with interconnecting everything, with integrating everything, with relating everything. It will show us that everything's related to everything else. Because this is essentially love, that love is that infinite self-integration of being, where everything is connected to everything else, and everything relates to everything else, and everything works with everything else. In the physical sciences, they talk about non-local causality, and would show how things that are not near to each other at all, that seem to be unrelated to each other, work together. Everything in the universe is working together for one purpose, that it's a holo movement. HOLOMOVEMENT. That was David Bohm's, one of his messages, that we live in a universe that is a holo movement. Everything moves together at the same time. And what looks like cross purposes to us, what looks like friction to us, isn't at all. That's only a perception, you see. It's a question of with what consciousness do we perceive our universe. And if we perceive it from love's standpoint, it's a holo movement. It's a frictionless universe. It's a universe with purpose, where everything is working together. Everything is working in a pattern, in a design, not at cross purposes, but with one great purpose. And that's the idea of love. That love has an idea. And it draws everything into it It gathers everything into it. Nothing is left out. If we read with our 5 physical senses, we try to find something in the world and we say, well, certainly that doesn't belong. But we drop our status. We drop the status of the consciousness of truth when we read with the 5 physical senses. We have to build on the consciousness of truth, to read with the categories of truth, with the divine system of reference within us, to strengthen that within us, to nurture that within us, to rely on it, to trust it. I think in the textbook it talks about trusting truth, that we must trust truth. Do we trust that which we have read in the textbook, which we have professed to in the textbook? Do we trust it? Or do we drop our, what do I want to say, we fall off of our platform and take the world's standpoint, and then we see what the world sees. We see an inharmonious, friction-filled world of not filled with promise. So you see that love, truth and love, give us a standard that the world does not have, a standard of consciousness, a framework of consciousness by which to interpret everything aright. And truth, as we said, has been leading us somewhere. Leading us somewhere, not leading us to a dead end stop. Okay, here's all the truth. We have all the truth now. We've got it all. Finished, period. No, it doesn't say God created everything with 6 days. It's not 6 days of creation. It's 7 days of creation. So that development, that evolution, from the first to the second to the third to the fourth to the fifth to the sixth, is leading us somewhere. It's leading us to the 7th. And we're going to begin to look more deeply into what that consciousness of the 7th is. Well, I haven't taken one of my notes, one page of my notes yet. I don't even know how it's all going to work now. But it says here that the story of the spiritual idea, the history of the spiritual idea, and also our story, our history, goes on then through periods of spiritual evolution. You may think it's periods of material progress, periods of certain view of the world, a certain psychological view, certain political view that changes here and there and perhaps evolves. I don't know whether political views evolve. Don't get me into that arena. I'm just not good at that at all. But that we evolve through periods of spiritual evolution. And these are periods of progress, periods of conscious progress. And these we call 1,000-year periods. I hope you hear them differently now than hearing them in 6,000 years ago, so and so and so happened to Noah or Moses or whatever, but that what we're talking about are divine or spiritual archetypes that apply to every individual, that are adapted to each individual consciousness. And so each 1,000-year period stands for a certain definite standpoint in that evolution of spiritual consciousness. And each 1,000-year period has its right place within the whole. I wanted to talk to you really about that tonight, about its place in the whole development. Because it is that place that gives it its value. Its place within the order, within the divine order. You see, it's only if we try to take something out of its place in the order that we have problems, that we feel destabilized. Rightly so, that we feel destabilized. Rightly so, that we feel uncertain, that we feel uncomfortable. Because if we try to take one of those 1,000-year periods out of its place in the whole order, it becomes compromised for us. Let me add that. For us. Not for the 1,000-year period itself. Not for the meaning of that state and stage in the order itself. But the moment you see that we would, for instance, try to discard the 6,000-year period and say, hey, you know, this is the age of love. This is the 7,000-year period, and I've heard so much about that, and I really want to move on to love. And I'm tired of truth. I'm tired of studying and going over the system and drilling in the system and becoming clear about what is true and what isn't true. And so I think I've really kind of had enough of that, and I'd like to move on to love, because love sounds so good, doesn't it? Huh? And so there may be something latent in our consciousness that says, I want to discard truth, or because we've come to love now as the breaking in of the 1,000-year period of love, that we would feel, well, love is better than truth, you see. Let's just leave truth behind. These are all the suggestions that come in. And that's one side of the coin. What's the other side of the coin? That we try to hold on to truth. That we try to hold on to a standpoint which is no longer the main accentuation for this age. No longer the main accentuation for this age. We may try to hang on for various reasons, because it was our heyday, the age of truth, the experience of truth, the glory days of truth. I can testify to them. The glory days of these last 40 years of living with the constant pioneering of what truth is, the presentation of truth, the presentation of the categories of being, of seeing them in the textbook, of seeing them in the Bible, of watching that story of truth evolve and evolve and evolve over those years. And of loving that, of loving every year something new, every year something further, something deeper about truth and the categories of truth, the system and science of being. And so we may hearken back to that, and we're allowed to do that. We're allowed to hearken back. We're allowed to recall, to remember, to love, to adore that fact of how truth was unfolded to us through its many exponents, its great pioneers. But if we try to hold on to that at the, what would you say, at the expense of, at the cost of, moving into the new consciousness of love, then what happens? We have to see what happens when we do that.